2, and 3 row. We're going to do the same thing we just did, piecing and or waviness, and that all my points of the quilt will be completed. Originally I was going to do it with the light pink, finding the same color as the backing for it for long arm quilting, and that is because, you know, I'm pulling it out, I'm measuring the quilt. And also when I put it on the quilting on the long arm. Hi everyone, it's Denise with Wondubar Crafts. I am back today to try and finish up these rows and get these borders on our quilt top so that I can get it on the long arm and get it quilted, bound, and delivered. So it is a hot one today. I apologize if you can hear the fan. This room unfortunately does not have any AC or heating, but I have like a little heater for the winter, but I don't have AC, so I have to kind of fan it in from the house. And it is hot today. We're under a heat advisory. So I started a little early this morning knowing it's going to be hot and might get hot in the room. So I want to try and get some of this done as soon as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, as you can see, this is my block 1. And what we're going to want to do is sew block 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6. All right, and we need to make sure that we line up our seams so everything goes, you know, sews together really nice. And so let's see, it goes this way like so. So what I do is I'll lay it out, and normally it's the opposite direction, so it's facing me, but I need to get it so it faces you guys. So I'm gonna do this one and then the other two the way I need to do it for myself. So what I do is I'll align it up, I find the center, and then I'm gonna butt my seams together just like we did building the blocks. If we can get those seams to lay nice, and if you just kind of press down, you'll be able to feel if it overlaps. You just want to make sure it's laying flat and that it's even. And then I like to use the clips, and I'm going to clip that centerpiece. Then you can work either side. That way I know my center is lined up, and I'm going to do the same thing with every seam that needs to butt up. The length of this should be 36.5, and I did measure them and they came out okay. So okay, that seam right there. And sometimes you might need to tug a little bit. You don't want to stretch it, but you know, if your pieces have been laying for a while, sometimes they'll shrink in, not really shrink in, but they might pull in a little bit, or they might get wrinkled because they've been sitting. But I want to make sure that all my edges, all these pieces line up, because that is what is going to make it look. It's going to bring out the pattern. And sometimes, you know, a small smidgen off, like under 1/8 of an inch. And 1/8 of an inch is quite a bit. I mean, when you're looking at, that's quite a bit. Anything under that, your eye will place it together, but anything really over that, it becomes noticeable. And the whole objective is to try and, you know, be as neat as possible. And then I'm going to put one at the very end, and then I'm going to continue doing the same thing across the bottom. Just make sure you lay it on a flat surface so that you can do it. If you don't have a table like this, try your ironing board. It's very helpful that way. So you're going to do this with all 3 segments. So, you know, attaching 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, so that you have 3 rows ready to be sewn. All right, I have all 3 of my pieces here clipped together. I'm ready to take it to the sewing machine. I'm just going to run a straight seam right down there. Also, one thing I don't know if I mentioned, but I'll mention it again. Make sure that when you align your seams, you're also aligning your edges even as well, all the way across. And like I said, if you find that you have an area that it's just off and it's bugging you, take it to the ironing board, give it a nice little press out on both sides, and then try to realign. Sometimes it's just a matter of, you know, it's been sitting and the way it sat, maybe it didn't sit correctly on the seam. It pulled it in a little bit. It could have wrinkled somewhere and you're just not seeing it. But if you're getting a large gap in there, you may consider taking like part of the block out and readjusting it so that everything works out, because that is why I always work from the center and I'll work outward. That way I can see, is it on this side or is it on this side that there's a problem? And instead of starting at this end and then it gets pushed way down and you're trying to back up and try and find where the mistake may be to have to fix it. So start from the middle and work outward from left and to right. It seems to work really well for me. Maybe for others it's not so much, but that's what works for me, and hopefully it will work for you. Okay, so I've sewn them and I've ironed them. I ironed my seam downward so that this is the top, this is the bottom, and my seam is ironed downward. This is going to make it much smoother to quilt on the long arm. So now that we've gotten 3 rows, so now we have 1, 2, and 3 row, we're going to do the same thing we just did, piecing these 2 rows together. We're going to sew all 3 together. But what I normally do is I'll do 1 at a time, so I'll sew 1 to 2, then I'll iron it down, and then I'll take and iron 3 to 2. That way it doesn't get really heavy trying to manage it under the sewing machine, because I do like to take my time to make sure that that seam is nice and straight, and that, you know, I make sure that by doing that, you know, I don't have any crickiness, puffiness, and or waviness, and that all my points here match up as I go. So I just take my time. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm not going to have points to have to worry about because these are all these pieces, so not as many seams to have to worry about getting to connect together, or points to connect together, so to speak. But like I said, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm gonna sew 1 to 2, iron it, then 3 to 2, iron it out, and then the quilt top will, this portion, the inner portion of the design portion of the quilt, will be completed. All right, guys, so this is the center of the quilt completed. I did lay it out sideways so you could kind of see it, but it actually is going to lay this way. And I really like it. I like the color combination, although I could see the advantage perhaps of, you know, maybe like this color being a little bit darker to really make this portion of the pinwheel pop out more. But overall, I really like it, even though we had that little oopsie mistake in there with where this one should have been over here and vice versa. And maybe that would have made it pop a little more. I don't know. But I really do like how the center has come out. I'm happy with it. So now what we need to do, I'm so excited, we're almost there, is put our borders on. Okay, so now we're ready to put our borders on. And what I like to do, it doesn't give you specific directions on doing your sides first and then your tops, or top first and bottom. It's really personal preference. So I'm going to put my sides on first and then do my top and bottom. So you're going to need 2 of these smaller strips, and you're going to sew. I'm going to do each border at a time. I'm not going to do them one-on-one because these are pieced together using, you're just going to use 5 of those strips. And so, but what I need to do though is trim off my selvage from the end here. So what I do is, I'm not using the mat as a guide, I'm using my ruler. So I'm going to lay it across the dotted line that I can see through, get to the very edge and just trim it off, because you're going to have to sew edge to edge. These ones you just sew straight across, so you know, you're just going to attach it here to here and then open your seam. That's what I like to do anyway. You can fold it over, press it to one side or the other if you so choose. I like to open mine on my borders. So find the edge and the end, make sure that's even, trim that off, do the same thing on the other side here, because I don't like, even though one side of your selvage does have the print on it, if you, it has all those little holes in them, you know. And so I try and cut those off because I don't like those little holes, you know, like, you know, the little boop, 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 boop. I think that's where it's maybe sits on the machine to get printed, the fabric itself, maybe. I don't know. All right. So now all I'm going to do is sew these end to end, and I'm going to do one border at a time. I'm not going to do both because I'm going to cut off the excess and use that on the next strip to make it. So then it should come out, you know, so that I'll have 2 remaining pieces to join across the bottom, because the bottom is like 36.5. So one strip across should be sufficient. So let me get these sewn, and then I'll show you how I pin it onto the quilt side and sew it. All right, so now I have sewn, so I have one big long strip. I opened my seam. So now what I want to do is grab the quilt top and lay it flat. Now I would normally do this on the ironing board because it is a little bit longer than this table, but I'm not going to start in the center. I'm going to start at the end, and the reason why I don't trim my edges, because like I have one edge that's a little bit longer than the other, and sometimes that happens, but all my pieces are all lined up, so I had a little excess over here, and it happens. I'm not going to freak out over it. But what I'm going to do is, I know that coming down, looking at the quilt side, they're all pretty much even. So I am going to start at this one end down here. And knowing that this is shorter, I'm going to align it to the shorter piece here. Okay? Because it would be the same thing as if snipping it. But I'm not going to freak out over it. And that everywhere that there's a seam, I'm just going to clip. Okay. This also helps me. This strip is a straight edge, so having it as my alignment instead of the quilt top makes my border sit straighter, I think, anyway. So, and then I want, by clipping it, I'm keeping my seam down where it needs to go, because I'm going to be sewing on the top and not seeing the seam underneath. And I don't want my seams to get all bunched up. And just align it all the way, making sure that your seams lay flat. And I know that there's a lot here and you can trim it. I don't. I wait to make sure that I didn't, you know, not have it laid flat. It happens, you know, you might have had a little pucker or something and you thought you had it flat. And then if you cut your piece, then it's too short. So I wait till the end, I get it sewn on, and then I'll cut that piece to be even with my quilt top. See, like right now it is not wanting to lay. I'll make sure that that's flat. Okay, so then I'm just going to do a straight seam straight down that on top of that border strip, and then I'm going to when I sorry, distraction, squirrel. When I iron it, I'm going to iron it so that my seam goes towards the border side. All right, so I've sewn my border. I'm going to go ahead and cut off this excess piece. I'm just going to measure it with the edge of the bottom of the quilt. Sorry, you guys probably hear my rooster. He's being testy today. I don't know, probably because it's hot. All right, so this piece I'm keeping to attach to the next side. Make sure that this side is even. Turn it a little bit here. Make sure that's even. It is. Okay, so now I'm just gonna iron it towards the side of the out towards the binding, or towards the border. Sorry, not the binding, the border. Alright, so border is sewn on, ironed back so that the seam is towards the border. And I'm just going to repeat that process of what I did last time with the strip. Alright, I'm going to take a full strip. I am going to measure and, you know, line it up to the line on my ruler, not on my table. Cut my salvage pieces off. Alright. Make sure that's even so I get a nice straight edge there. And then I'm going to take the salvage piece that was cut off from the last border and just attach it here and repeat the process for the other side of the long border. Okay, so I've got my second border, so both my side borders are done. I made sure that when I put my border on, where the seam is here is on the opposite end on the other side of the border, on the other side of the quilt top. And I do that just for aesthetics, just so you know you don't have all the seams always in the same place. It kind of breaks it up a little bit. So now we are ready to attach our top and bottom, and these pieces here are long enough to fit across. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm not going to bother trimming. I'm just going to go ahead and start clipping them. You can use pins, obviously, if you want to, but you guys know me and pins, we don't fare well together because I get stuck a lot. So, and that's never fun. And I'm just gonna use my clips, try and keep this even. Right, I'm just gonna clip it right at the seam, so I know a seam is coming up, so I can make sure it lays flat under the sewing machine, because it really does stink when you're trying to quilt something later, and I'm sure your long armor will appreciate that. If it's folded over, it can sometimes cause just a little bit extra bulk, and an area that bulks up can sometimes cause some other issues on the quilting frame while you're quilting it. And and not lay flat, and it can you know, cause some tension issues with the tension on your thread and all that hoopla. So anyway, so I'm just gonna sew this on, and then we'll come back and cut the ends off. We're almost finished with the first border. All right, so now we are ready to trim off the excess on this top border here. I'm just gonna align it to my ruler here, so that I've got a line here and the edge of my ruler against the other side of the border. I keep calling it a binder. All right, and then I'm going to flip it up. Looks like I've got a little bit more I need to trim down so that it's even. Okay. Flip it out. All right, we're good on that side. I'm going to turn it a little bit so I have more manageability over here, maybe. Okay, and so that you guys can see this on camera, I'm going to kind of turn it at an angle a little bit, but I'm going to measure. I have different lines on this ruler. This is one of those Quilter Select rulers. It has that grippy on the bottom. It's not overly grippy, so it does kind of slide a little bit, but it gives a lot more resistance, and which is great when you're trying to do something like this and want to get kind of a little more precision, and then you put your hand on it and then it slips off. Oh, that drives me nuts. So, all right, and we are even. So I'm going to iron this out towards the border, and then I'm going to repeat the same steps with the last border, sewing it on, clipping it on, sewing it on, and ironing it. All right, guys, there's the first border finished. Looking good. I'm really liking how this is coming out. Very, very happy with my seams, with everything. Now, I want to give you guys a little tip here. If for some reason you have trouble when you're ironing and you have an area, say for instance like this, where all these seams come together and it's just not wanting to lay flat, when you iron it open, that seam, take your spritzer bottle and just spritz some water along the seam, and then re-iron it and just kind of focus on that area. That water helps to loosen the fabric a little bit. Then, you know, it creates steam when you're ironing, and then it'll help to replace it where you want it to go. And so then your seams should lay a lot flatter that way. I do that a lot of times on my borders, especially my corner areas down in here, because, you know, you've got two areas and an angle coming together, and they kind of want to puff up sometimes. So I spritz them and then re-iron them, and they typically lay really nice and smooth. So our next step is to do our outer border. You just do it the same way. That's all I'm going to do. The same way we just did this inner border, just doing it on a thicker border. And so I'm going to go ahead and complete that border and come back and show you what it looks like. All right, you guys, this is the quilt top finished, and I really like it. I think though, I'm using this fabric for my backing. I haven't decided if I want to bind it, which might be a good idea to kind of block it in. I had thought about doing it with this. Originally I was going to do it with the light pink, but and I think it might be too light, so I may be doing my binding with this darker. Although I normally don't do the binding the same color as the backing, but hey, you know, it actually might work. So, I did take an extra step to prepare it for long arm quilting, and that is I sewed about 1/8 of an inch from the edge for a few reasons. it prepares it for the long arm, in the fact that if you have an area like here, like your seams, or part of the, I don't know if the, let's see if it's over here on this side, where the seam for the, right here is, it tacks it down, so it will lay flat on the long arm, okay? And then also, if I don't get a chance to quilt it right away, if I was doing a quilt, you know, for myself, do you see all this fraying that's happening, that's going on right now? Okay, this, if it keeps going, you know, you can lose some of your length and your width of your quilt because of it. This should stop it if it happens to get there to that point, if I don't have time to quilt it right away. I do typically ask my clients to do this step before they ship it, or, you know, bring it to me. It also serves, because, you know, I'm pulling it out, I'm measuring the quilt, and there's a lot of movement, and let's face it, fabric frays, okay? So this will help with any loss on the edges. And it also, when I put it on the quilting on the long arm, I have a guide to tack it down that's still within that 1/4 inch for my binding, okay? So and I am going to long arm quilt this here in a few. I'm going to set everything up, and I'll probably do a couple highlights, and I don't know how long this video is so far, but I will check and see. And we'll I'm not going to video the full long arm process. So guys, that's it for today. If I have room, I will add the highlights for the quilting. If not, that'll be on the next video, where we will finish everything up, and I will show you how I do my binding with the miter corners. I'm not going to follow the instructions from the book, because I'm really not a fan of that kind of binding. So I do want to do the mitered corners on it, so I will show you how to do that process, which is very similar to what we did on the tote bags. It's just on a quilt, and we're going to do some mitered corners. So until then, guys, plenty hugs, loves, and blessings. Mwah. Bye, guys.